The restaurant was packed. A fancy rooftop venue Lisa had chosen for our 20th wedding anniversary. She went all out, golden decorations, candles flickering against the darkening skyline, expensive champagne flowing like water. She was glowing in a deep red dress, laughing, her fingers grazing my shoulder every now and then, like she still cared. Like we were still us. I played my part well. Smiling, nodding at guests, holding her waist in the places where a devoted husband should. But beneath the polished exterior, my stomach churned with something dark. I wasn't an idiot. I had known for months. Hell, maybe even years. But it was only recently that I uncovered the full depth of the betrayal. And tonight, she had no idea that I was about to burn her perfect illusion to the ground. The first red flag wasn't just her sudden obsession with this extravagant party. It was the guest list. Why are we inviting so many people I don't even know? I had asked a week ago, leaning against the kitchen counter as she scrolled through RSVPs on her phone. Oh, come on, it's our 20th, it should be big. Some new friends, some old ones, relax. Her smile was too easy. Too practiced. Lisa never let things just happen. She planned, calculated, manipulated. This wasn't just a party. And when the night finally arrived, I learned exactly why. The moment came when the crowd had settled, when the waiters had finished serving the entrees, when the energy of the room was at its peak. A man I had never seen before stood up. Tall, charismatic, too comfortable. The conversations died down as people turned toward him, glasses in hand. Lisa didn't stop him. She knew. He raised his flute of champagne and smiled, smirked. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice smooth, confident. Let's raise a toast. His eyes flickered to mine, and I swear I saw amusement dancing in them. To our generous host, a man who has, unknowingly, been taking care of me and my family for years. Silence. Collective breath held. Lisa didn't move. She didn't gasp. She didn't even flinch. The man's smirk widened. He turned his gaze back to the crowd and lifted his glass higher. To 20 years of love, sacrifice, and financial support. Cheers. A few people hesitantly clinked their glasses, either too stunned or too afraid to react. I exhaled slowly. The weight in my chest was unbearable, but my face remained unreadable, controlled. I lifted my glass, a slow, deliberate motion. My pulse was steady. My hand was steady. Lisa finally turned to look at me. I saw it then, the flicker of unease in her eyes. The first crack in her confidence. Because she knew me, and she knew that I was never the kind of man to sit quietly while my life was being turned into a joke. I smiled. Not the kind of smile that reassured. The kind that made people nervous. And as I took a sip of my champagne, I knew one thing for certain: by the end of this night, Lisa and her secret family would never forget the anniversary gift I had prepared for them. The glass in my hand felt cool, steady. The bubbles from the champagne fizzed against my tongue, but I barely tasted it. The room was too silent, stretched thin with tension. Eyes darted between me, Lisa, and the man who had just humiliated me in front of everyone. Lisa's hand twitched at her side. Maybe she expected me to explode. Maybe she wanted it. If I lost my temper, she could paint herself as the victim. The poor, innocent wife caught between a cruel husband and an arrogant lover. But I didn't explode. Instead, I placed my glass down, slow and deliberate, and looked directly at her. Lisa, I said, my voice calm. Aren't you going to introduce us? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. For the first time in a long time, she looked unsure. The man beside her, still wearing that damn smirk, extended a hand toward me like we were old friends. James, he said. But I'm sure you've heard about me. I didn't take his hand. I could feel the weight of every single gaze in the room, the way some of the guests had started whispering behind their glasses. A few of Lisa's friends had their eyes cast down, their faces tight with guilt. They knew, maybe not all the details, but enough. James lowered his hand, chuckling. Can't blame you. Awkward situation. He turned to Lisa, resting a hand on the small of her back. My wife's back. Babe. Looks like you left out a few details when you said he was clueless. She flinched, just slightly, but I caught it. So did everyone else. Lisa, I repeated. How long? She blinked, playing dumb. How long what? I smiled again. That same slow, knowing smile. How long have you been sleeping with him? A sharp gasp came from somewhere in the crowd. My mother, maybe. Lisa's lips parted, but no words came out. She was calculating, deciding on her next move. James, however, had no such hesitation. He leaned back, throwing an arm over the chair beside him. Oh man, he exhaled dramatically. I was wondering if you knew, but I guess not. What's it been, Lisa? 3 years? 4. More whispers. More shifting. A few guests looked ready to bolt like they had wandered into a live crime scene. Lisa turned to James, her face twisted in fury. What the hell are you doing? He just laughed. What? He asked. She whipped back to me, anger replacing fear. This is not the place for this conversation. Really? I tilted my head. Because it seemed like the perfect place when your boyfriend toasted to my stupidity in front of all our friends and family. She opened her mouth. Shut it again. There was no coming back from this. No clean exit. She had underestimated me. And I wasn't done yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled, you see, Lisa, I was actually going to wait until after tonight. But since James decided to speed things up, let's do this now. Her eyes flickered to my phone. Widened slightly. What are you doing? I turned the screen toward the guests. Pressed play. Lisa's voice filled the air. Moaning. Giggling. Begging. The recording wasn't just audio. It was video. A hotel room. Lisa on top of James. Her red nails dragging down his chest. Her head thrown back in pleasure. A perfect, crystal clear shot of her betraying me. The silence was deafening. And then chaos. The moment the video started playing, the air in the room changed. It was no longer just tension. It was an electric charge, thick and suffocating, pressing against everyone present. Conversations died instantly. Champagne glasses froze mid-sip. Lisa's breath hitched so loudly I could hear it over the sound of her own betrayal blaring from my phone. I kept the volume just loud enough. Not enough to make it crass, but enough that every single person at our anniversary party could hear it. Could see it. Lisa, half naked, straddling James. The expensive hotel sheets beneath them twisted, her red nails raking down his chest as she laughed, whispered things she had never whispered to me. The worst part? James wasn't shocked. He wasn't even embarrassed. He just leaned back in his chair, sipped his drink, and grinned like this was entertainment. Like I had just provided him with a front-row seat to his favorite show. Lisa, on the other hand, lost every ounce of her composure. She lunged for my phone, but I was quicker. I pulled it away, taking a step back as she hissed through clenched teeth, "Turn that off." I didn't. I let it play for a few more seconds, just long enough to hear her panting, more, don't stop, before I finally ended the clip. Lisa's face was drained of color. Her red lipstick, once perfectly applied, looked smeared at the edges from where she had nervously chewed her lip. Her hands trembled slightly, not from guilt, not from regret, but from sheer, burning rage. Not at herself. At me. "How dare you?" She seethed, voice low but vibrating with fury. I tilted my head. "How dare I?" I repeated, amused. "Lisa, sweetheart. I'm not the one who spent the last 4 years screwing another man behind my husband's back." The whispers around us turned into full-blown murmurs. Some guests turned away, pretending to be anywhere else but here. Others watched, riveted, eager to see how the drama would unfold. I turned my gaze to the crowd, scanning familiar faces. Some looked shocked, some looked smug, and a few looked guilty, because they knew. They had known all along. Lisa's friends, her co-workers, even a couple of our mutual friends. They had exchanged glances at dinner parties, shared knowing looks when I talked about Lisa's late nights at the office, the business trips that lasted just a little too long. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of their own cowardice press down on them. And then, just loud enough for the entire room to hear, I said, "Let's not pretend Lisa was careful. Hell, half of you probably knew before I did." A few people flinched. A woman near the back actually gasped and turned to look at her husband like she was just now putting the pieces together. Lisa's fury deepened. She turned, scanning the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. No one spoke. Even the people who had been on her side knew there was no salvaging this. She spun back toward me, voice shrill. You had no right to do this here. I arched a brow. Oh, but James had the right to humiliate me in front of everyone? I let out a humorless chuckle, slipping my phone back into my pocket. You should be thanking me, Lisa. I could have sent this to your boss. To your mother. To our daughter. Her breath caught. Ah, there it was. The one thing she still cared about. Ava. Our daughter. Our 18-year-old daughter who thought her mother was a strong, independent, loving woman. Who had no idea that while I was paying for her college, her mother was spending my money on hotel suites and expensive gifts for her other family. Lisa's nostrils flared. You wouldn't. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough that only she could hear. I would, I murmured. And if you don't want Ava to see what kind of woman raised her, I suggest you sit down and shut up before I start getting really creative. Her lips trembled. She knew I meant it. She knew that whatever humiliation she had suffered in the last 5 minutes was nothing compared to what I could do if I really wanted to. Slowly, stiffly, she sank back into her chair. James let out a low whistle, swirling the champagne in his glass. Damn, he muttered. Didn't think you had it in you? I shot him a look so cold he actually stopped smirking. For the first time tonight, he looked uncertain. Good. Because the real fun was only just beginning. The moment Lisa sat back down, something shifted. The energy in the room went from awkward discomfort to an almost morbid curiosity. People weren't just witnessing a scandal, they were watching a war unfold in real time, and no one wanted to miss the next move. Lisa's hands curled into fists on the table, her nails digging into the pristine white tablecloth. She was trying to contain herself, but I could see the cracks forming. The way her breathing had picked up. The way her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. I took my time. Adjusted my cufflinks. Sipped my champagne. Let her stew. James, ever the smug bastard, broke the silence first. Well, he exhaled, setting his glass down. That was one hell of a show. But now that we've all had our fun, I think it's time I held up a hand, cutting him off. He blinked. Then frowned. Lisa's eyes darted between us. What else could you possibly have to say? She demanded, her voice tight with barely restrained fury. I smiled. Not because I was enjoying this, though I was. Not because I had won, because this wasn't over yet. I smiled because I wasn't done. I reached into my suit pocket again, but this time I didn't pull out my phone. I pulled out an envelope. Thick. Heavy. Carefully sealed. Lisa's brows furrowed. What's that? I tossed it onto the table in front of her. Open it. She hesitated. James, however, had no such patience. He leaned over, grabbed the envelope, and tore it open himself. What is this? His words cut off as he pulled out the thick stack of papers inside. His eyes skimmed the first few lines. His smirk vanished. Lisa snatched the papers from him and started reading. Her face went white. She flipped to the second page. The third. Her breath came out in short, sharp bursts. By the time she reached the last page, her hands were shaking so violently she almost dropped them. No, she whispered. You know you can't do this. James looked between her and the papers, his confusion morphing into something closer to irritation. What the hell is it? I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. Divorce papers. Lisa sucked in a breath. You and I continued smoothly, pulling out another document. A post-nuptial agreement, signed by you. I placed it on the table beside the divorce papers. Lisa didn't touch it. She wouldn't touch it. James, however, couldn't help himself. He reached for it, scanning the contents, his expression darkening with every second that passed. Lisa, he said slowly, turning to her, is this real? She didn't respond, because she knew. She knew exactly what I had done. Years ago, after one particularly rough patch in our marriage, Lisa had agreed to sign a postnuptial agreement. At the time, she had been so desperate to prove her commitment to me that she signed it without much thought. And now it was her worst nightmare, because the terms were brutal. The cheating spouse, her walks away with nothing. No house, no savings, no alimony, nothing. And considering that Lisa had been living off my income for years, this wasn't just a setback. This was financial annihilation. You son of a bitch, she breathed, her voice shaking. I tilted my head. I'm sorry, Lisa. Were you under the impression that you could humiliate me, steal from me, lie to me, and still walk away with half of everything I built? Her chest rose and fell rapidly, panic creeping into her expression. She turned to James. Say something, she hissed. James just laughed. A short, sharp bark of laughter. Say what? He leaned back, crossing his arms. Sounds to me like you played yourself. Her mouth opened and closed, her betrayal flashing across her face. You promised, I promised, James cut in, voice turning cold, that I'd take care of you. That was before I realized you'd be bringing exactly $0 into this relationship. Lisa's face crumpled. You knew I didn't have my own money. James shrugged. I thought you'd at least have a settlement. He gestured to the papers. But it looks like your husband thought of everything. And I'm not about to go broke playing house with you, sweetheart. Lisa's breath hitched. You're serious? James didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because Lisa already knew the truth. Her lover, her soulmate, the man she had thrown away her marriage for, wasn't going to save her. She had nothing. No husband. No money. And now? No James either. Lisa turned to me, eyes blazing with desperate fury. You did this on purpose. I smiled again. Of course I did. Her nostrils flared. You knew I was cheating. I nodded. For a while now. Then why? Her voice cracked. Why didn't you leave sooner? I held her gaze. Let her stew in the weight of that question. Then finally I answered. Because I wanted you to feel exactly what I felt, I said quietly. Betrayed. Helpless. Destroyed. Lisa's lips trembled. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But she couldn't. Because she had already lost. Lisa sat frozen, her hands gripping the divorce papers so tightly they crumpled at the edges. She looked like she wanted to scream, to throw something, to do something, but there was nothing left for her to do. The reality had hit her like a freight train, and now she was just sitting in the wreckage, staring at the destruction she had caused with her own hands. James, on the other hand, was already detaching himself. He straightened his suit jacket, exhaled slowly, and gave Lisa a look I had seen before. The kind of look a man gives when he realizes he's made a terrible investment. Lisa noticed it too. She turned to him, her voice sharp with desperation. You knew I didn't have my own money. We talked about this. James didn't even try to pretend he cared. He just shook his head, laughing under his breath. Yeah, well, I also assumed you weren't an idiot. He tapped the post-nup with 2 fingers. But turns out you signed your own death sentence years ago. Lisa flinched like he had slapped her. You? Me? James scoffed. No, Lisa. You didn't think ahead. You didn't plan for this. And now you want me to fix it? Nah, that's not how this works. She reached for his arm. He pulled away. I watched it happen. Watched her lose him right in front of me. She had thrown away 20 years of marriage for this man. Lied for him. Stolen for him. Humiliated me for him. And yet, the moment she was no longer a financially viable option, he discarded her without a second thought. Lisa sucked in a shaky breath, turning back to me, eyes wild. You're not going to get away with this. I laughed. I couldn't help it. She still thought she had leverage. Lisa, I said, resting my elbows on the table, my voice low, calm. What exactly do you think you can do to me? Her mouth opened. Shut. She had nothing. I leaned back, taking my time, watching her struggle to comprehend just how thoroughly she had lost. The house? Mine. The cars? Mine. Our savings? Mine. I gestured toward James, who was already eyeing the exit. Your other life? Gone. Your future? Completely dependent on whether or not you can find some other poor bastard to take you in before your bank account runs dry. Her breathing was ragged. I still have Ava. I went still. The room went silent. Even James, who had been checking his phone like this entire conversation was beneath him, looked up at that. Lisa saw my expression shift, and for a brief second, her confidence returned. She thought she had found my weakness. And she had. Ava. Our daughter. The only person in this world I still cared about. Lisa's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. No matter what you take from me, I will always have Ava. She tilted her head, voice turning sickly sweet. And do you really think she's going to take your side after you humiliated her mother like this? Ah, there it was. Her last play. Her final move. She was betting everything on Ava, assuming that no matter what happened, our daughter would always choose her. And for a long time I had assumed that too. Until last week. I reached into my pocket again. Lisa tensed like she was expecting me to pull out another devastating piece of evidence. But this time it wasn't a recording. It was a letter. Folded neatly. Handwritten. Lisa's expression faltered. What is that? I didn't answer her. Instead, I unfolded it and began to read. Dad, by the time you read this, I'll already be gone. I know Mom is planning the big anniversary party, and I know you're going to go through with it because that's the kind of man you are. You always finish what you start. But I can't be there. I can't watch her stand beside you like she hasn't been lying to you for years. I can't pretend to love her when I don't even know who she is anymore. She told me she was leaving you for James. She told me to pack my bags. She didn't even ask what I wanted. But I'm 18 now. I get to decide where I go. And I choose you, Dad. Always. Ava. The paper shook slightly in my hands as I finished reading. Not because I was nervous. Not because I was angry. But because those words had saved me. Lisa's mouth moved soundlessly. She looked like she had been struck by lightning. Ava, she choked out. She wrote that? I met her gaze. She left yesterday, I said, voice calm. Packed her things while you were out shopping. She's staying with my sister until the divorce is finalized. Lisa's breath hitched. She shook her head. No, that's not she wouldn't she did, I cut in. Because she sees you for what you really are. Lisa's chest rose and fell too quickly. She looked at James like he might contradict me. Like he might tell her this wasn't happening. But James was already standing. He adjusted his jacket, let out a low whistle, and gave me a nod. Well, this has been fun, he said. But I think I'll take my leave. Lisa's head snapped toward him. You're leaving. James gave her a look of pure pity. What, you thought I was going to stick around after this disaster? He scoffed. Nah, babe. I was here for the good times. And those? He gestured at the papers. Those are over. Lisa's breath came in short, sharp bursts. James, please, don't, but he was already walking away. Lisa shot up from her chair. James? Her voice cracked. She ran after him, grabbing his sleeve. You promised. James sighed, pried her fingers off his jacket, and looked her dead in the eye. I promised to be there for you, he said. Not your problems. Then, without another word, he walked out. Lisa didn't move. Didn't breathe. For the first time in years, she looked small. Alone. And when she finally turned back to face me, the fire in her eyes had been snuffed out completely. For the first time all night, she finally understood. She had lost everything. Lisa stood motionless in the middle of the room, her face blank, her body eerily still. James was gone. Ava was gone. Her reputation shattered. Everything she had spent years building through deceit and manipulation had crumbled in the span of a single evening. I watched her, waiting. I expected an outburst. Another attempt at control. Some last-ditch effort to claw her way out of the pit she had dug for herself. But she didn't move. She didn't even blink. The silence in the restaurant was suffocating. The guests, once captivated by the unfolding drama, now looked unsure whether they should stay or leave. Some whispered behind their hands. Some avoided eye contact. A few, clearly uncomfortable, slid their chairs back as if they were trying to disappear into the background. Lisa's breathing was shallow. I could see her hands trembling at her sides. Then, slowly, her lips parted. I should have destroyed you when I had the chance, she whispered. It was so quiet I almost thought I had imagined it. But no. The words had been real. The corner of my mouth twitched. Oh, Lisa, I murmured, tilting my head slightly. That's where you went wrong. You tried. But you were never as smart as you thought you were. Her eyes, still glassy with shock, suddenly sharpened. Rage flickered back to life. There she is. She sucked in a slow breath through her nose. The trembling in her hands stopped. The panic that had gripped her moments ago was forcefully shoved down, buried under something colder. You think you've won, she said, voice lower now. Steadier. I smirked. I know I have. Her lips curled. But it wasn't a smile. It was something closer to hatred. Lisa had always been a woman who could adapt. A survivor. I had seen it countless times. How she twisted situations to her advantage. How she reshaped herself to fit whatever narrative suited her best. And now she was doing it again. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to rewrite the script, to find a way to turn this moment into something she could control. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and lifted her chin. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, more certain. "You think leaving me with nothing will ruin me?" She scoffed, shaking her head. "You think I need your money? Your house? I'll be fine. I'll rebuild." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "And when I do, I will come back stronger." I arched a brow. "Oh? And do what, exactly?" She leaned in slightly, her voice barely audible. "Make you regret ever thinking you could beat me." I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. She flinched at the sound. "You still don't get it, do you?" I asked, shaking my head. "This isn't about revenge anymore, Lisa. This isn't a game you can win. This is your life now." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Doubt. Fear. I leaned in, my voice just as quiet as hers had been. "You spent years lying. Years pretending to be someone you weren't. And look where it got you." I gestured around us. "Your friends? They're only here because they wanted to watch you burn. James? He never loved you. And Ava?" My voice softened. "Ava saw the real you and ran." Her throat bobbed. Her hands clenched at her sides. I took a step back, letting the words settle, letting her feel the weight of them. Lisa had always been good at lying to others. But now she couldn't even lie to herself. She opened her mouth to argue, to lash out, to do something, but before she could speak, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, sir?" I turned. A waiter stood nearby, holding a black leather folder. "Your bill." I chuckled, shaking my head. Of course. The night wasn't over until the check was paid. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my wallet. Lisa's nostrils flared. "You're really just going to sit there and pay for everything like nothing happened?" I slid my credit card into the folder and handed it back to the waiter. "Why not?" I asked, arching a brow. "It's my anniversary after all." Lisa made a sound of pure frustration. But before she could finish, another voice cut in. "Lisa." We both turned. Her sister, Megan, had finally spoken. Until now, she had been sitting at the far end of the table, silent, watching. But something in her expression had shifted. Lisa stiffened. "Megan, don't. I can't believe you," Megan snapped. Standing up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "I knew you were selfish, but this is a new level, even for you." Lisa recoiled. "You don't understand," Megan laughed. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you've spent years treating the people who actually cared about you like garbage." She gestured toward me. "He gave you everything. He trusted you. And what did you do? Spit in his face." Lisa's jaw clenched. "Megan, enough." "No," Megan shot back. "I'm done. I'm so done." She turned to me. "For years, I've made excuses for her. I've tried to believe she wasn't as bad as people said she was. But tonight," she exhaled sharply. "Tonight, I saw who she really is." I nodded. "Took you long enough." Megan let out a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, it did." She turned back to Lisa, her eyes colder now. "I want nothing to do with you." Lisa flinched. "You don't mean that." "I do," Megan said firmly. "I'm done pretending." Lisa's lips trembled. She had lost James. She had lost Ava. And now? She had lost the only family member who had ever stood by her. Her hands curled into fists. She was shaking not from anger, but from something closer to fear. Because now, for the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Lisa stood there, her entire body rigid, eyes darting between me and Megan as if she could somehow undo what had just happened. She had always been a woman who knew how to manipulate a situation, twist people's emotions to get what she wanted. But now she was cornered. Exposed. There was no story she could spin, no lie she could tell, no more allies left to fight for her. I could see it sinking in. The weight of her choices pressing down on her chest, making it harder for her to breathe. Megan wasn't bluffing. Ava was really gone. James had left her in the dirt. And me? I was still here, watching her fall apart, waiting to see if she would take her loss with any dignity. For a long moment, she just stood there, her chest rising and falling in short, uneven breaths. Then, finally, she turned to Megan, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're my sister," she said, her tone sharp with desperation. Megan's expression didn't soften. Not anymore. Lisa flinched like she had been struck. She turned back to me, and for the first time since this entire night started, I saw something new in her eyes. Panic. Not the surface-level panic she had shown when I played the video, not the fleeting fear when she realized James wasn't going to save her. No, this was deeper. This was the panic of a woman realizing that, for the first time in her life, she had absolutely no control. Her mouth opened, and I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. A final insult. A plea. A pathetic attempt to turn the tables again. But when she spoke, her voice cracked. "Where do I go?" The question hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been said tonight. And suddenly, the reality of it all became undeniable. Lisa wasn't just losing a marriage. She was losing everything. She had no savings. No backup plan. The house? Mine. The car she drove? Paid for with my money. The friends she used to surround herself with? They weren't friends at all, they were just spectators, waiting to see how long it would take for her to crash and burn. And now, standing here in this restaurant with no husband, no boyfriend, no daughter, and no sister, she had nothing left. She was really, truly alone. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and let her words settle between us. Then I said, "Not my problem." Lisa's breath hitched. I could see the moment it fully clicked. That realization, the one she had been desperately trying to avoid, that I had actually completely cut her off. She had never once considered that I would actually let her drown. Because for 20 years I had always been the safety net. I had always been the one to fix things, to forgive, to stay. She had assumed that, even after everything, there was still a part of me that cared enough to throw her a lifeline. But there wasn't. Not anymore. Lisa's lips parted like she wanted to argue. To plead. But she must have seen it in my face. The finality of it. Because she didn't say a word. She just stood there, looking so small, so helpless, so completely lost, and for the first time in years I felt nothing for her. No love. No hate. Just nothing. I grabbed the divorce papers, stacked them neatly, and slid them across the table toward her. "Sign them," I said. She stared down at them, her hands twitching at her sides. Then, slowly, she reached out, took the pen, and pressed the tip to the paper. Her signature was shaky. Uneven. But it was there. And with that single motion, it was over. Lisa set the pen down with trembling fingers. She didn't look at me. Didn't look at Megan. She just stood up, quietly, and walked out of the restaurant. No screaming. No final insult. No dramatic exit. She just left. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt truly free. Lisa walked out of the restaurant, her movements stiff, mechanical. No one stopped her. No one called after her. The moment the doors swung shut behind her, the silence that had gripped the room finally cracked. A murmur spread through the guests, hushed conversations blooming at every table. Some people leaned in, whispering to their partners. Others openly stared at me, their eyes flicking between the divorce papers on the table and the empty seat where Lisa had just been. I ignored them. Megan let out a breath beside me, shaking her head. "Well," she muttered, running a hand through her hair. "That was brutal." I picked up the divorce papers, tapping them against the table to straighten them. "It had to be." She looked at me for a long moment. "Are you okay?" I considered the question. I had spent months preparing for this. I had planned every detail, calculated every move. I had made sure that when I finally confronted Lisa, there would be no way out for her. And now? It was done. She was gone. I was free. And yet, I exhaled slowly, setting the papers aside. "I don't know." Megan nodded as if she had expected that answer. "Yeah, that makes sense." I glanced around the room, noticing the way people kept sneaking looks at me. Some sympathetic. Some curious. A few, I realized, nervous. Because if Lisa could fall, if Lisa could be exposed in front of everyone, then they knew it could happen to them too. Some of them had secrets. Affairs. Lies. I could see it in the way their hands clenched around their glasses, in the way they avoided making eye contact. Interesting. But that wasn't my problem. Not anymore. A waiter hesitantly approached the table, clearing his throat. "Sir, should we still bring out the cake?" I blinked. The cake. The anniversary cake. I had completely forgotten about it. I glanced at Megan, and to my surprise, she actually laughed. I shook my head, letting out a small chuckle myself. "No. I think we're done here." The waiter nodded quickly and scurried away, relieved to be out of the blast zone. I stood up, adjusting my suit jacket. The guests were still staring, still watching, but I no longer cared. "Come on," I said to Megan. "Let's get out of here." She hesitated. "Are you sure? We could stay. Make them uncomfortable for a little longer." I smirked. "They're already uncomfortable." She grinned. "Good point." We left the restaurant together, stepping out into the cool night air. Lisa was nowhere in sight. Not that I had expected her to be. She was probably spiraling somewhere, trying to figure out what to do next. But whatever happened to her now? That was her problem. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't responsible for cleaning up her messes. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. It felt different. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Megan nudged me. "So," she said. "What now?" I looked up at the sky, at the city lights stretching in every direction. At a future that, for the first time in decades, was mine to decide. I smiled. "Anything I want." The car ride home was silent. Not the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that had filled the restaurant after Lisa's humiliation, but something lighter. Something that felt peaceful. Megan sat beside me in the passenger seat, arms crossed, gazing out the window as the city lights blurred past. Every now and then she'd let out a quiet chuckle, shaking her head as if replaying the night's events in her mind and still struggling to believe it had all actually happened. I understood the feeling. I had spent months preparing for tonight. Every move was calculated, every detail planned, every scenario considered. And yet, now that it was over, now that Lisa was gone, the divorce papers were signed, and James had abandoned her like yesterday's trash, I felt weightless. Not happy. Not relieved. Just light. It was strange. I had spent years drowning under the weight of my marriage, suffocated by Lisa's lies, by the quiet, creeping realization that the woman I had built my life with wasn't the person I thought she was. And now that I had finally broken free, now that I had stripped her of everything she had stolen from me, I was left wondering, what now? Because for the first time in 20 years, I didn't have to put out Lisa's fires. I didn't have to carry the burden of her betrayals. I didn't have to care. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Megan finally broke the silence. "Ava's gonna be okay," she said, glancing at me. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "I know. She called me earlier. Wanted to check in on you." That made me pause. I turned to look at Megan briefly before returning my eyes to the road. "What did she say?" Megan sighed. "She's angry. At Lisa. At herself for not realizing sooner. She feels guilty for not seeing what was happening between you two." I exhaled through my nose. "She has nothing to feel guilty about." "She knows that," Megan said. "But it's going to take time for her to believe it." She hesitated, then added, "She wants to see you." Something in my chest loosened. "Yeah." Megan smiled. "Yeah." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until she said it. Ava had been my biggest fear in all of this. Not losing my money, not Lisa running off with James. None of that mattered compared to her. I had been terrified that Lisa had poisoned her against me, that she would see me as the villain in all of this. But she didn't. She saw the truth. She saw me, and she still chose me. I swallowed down the lump in my throat and nodded. "I'll see her tomorrow." Megan nudged me playfully. "You know, I think you should take a vacation." I snorted. "A vacation?" "Yeah." She gestured at me. "Look at you. You've been dealing with Lisa's crap for years. You just nuked your entire marriage in one night. Don't you think you deserve to go sit on a beach somewhere and drink something with an umbrella in it?" I let out a breathless laugh. "I wouldn't even know where to go." Megan smirked. "Anywhere Lisa isn't." That actually made me laugh harder. "That's a good start." She grinned. "Seriously, though, you have a clean slate now. No Lisa. No obligations. You should do something for yourself. Anything." I let her words settle in as we pulled up to my house. No, my house. Lisa wasn't here anymore. This place, this space belonged to me now. For the first time in a long time, I could walk through that front door and not feel suffocated. I killed the engine and exhaled. I'll think about it. Megan nodded, satisfied. Good. We got out of the car, the cool night air wrapping around us. Megan stretched, letting out a groan. God, that dinner felt like it lasted years. I chuckled. Tell me about it. She gave me a look. Are you okay? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then finally I nodded. Yeah, I said. I think I am. And for the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. The house felt different when I stepped inside. For years, it had been filled with Lisa's presence. Her perfume lingering in the air. Her voice echoing down the halls. Her carefully curated decorations making it feel more like a showroom than a home. But tonight, as I closed the door behind me, there was an eerie kind of stillness. A quiet that wasn't oppressive, but peaceful. Lisa was gone. For good. Megan followed me in, kicking off her shoes. All right. I need a drink after that disaster. She wandered into the kitchen, opening cabinets until she found a bottle of whiskey. She held it up. Want one? I hesitated for a second, then nodded. Yeah. She poured 2 glasses, sliding one across the counter to me. We clinked them together in an unspoken toast to freedom, to closure, to whatever comes next, and drank. The warmth of the whiskey settled in my chest, but it didn't burn nearly as much as the weight of the past 20 years had. That fire had already burned itself out. Megan studied me over the rim of her glass. You seem calm. I exhaled slowly. I think I am. She nodded. Good. Then, after a moment, she smirked. You know, I gotta say, that was the most insane anniversary party I've ever been to. You really outdid yourself. I chuckled, shaking my head. That wasn't a party. That was a funeral. She raised an eyebrow. For Lisa, I clarified. For her lies. For everything she thought she had. I swirled the whiskey in my glass. I don't think she realized it until the moment James walked out. That was the second it truly hit her. She thought she could humiliate me. Thought she could walk away with everything. And instead, she lost everything. Megan hummed. She'll try to claw her way back. I nodded. Probably. Lisa was a survivor. She wouldn't just fade into the background and accept her fate. She would scrape and scramble, looking for someone new to latch onto, some way to recover. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Megan leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? For years, my life had revolved around Lisa, keeping the peace, making things work, ignoring the growing distance between us. Now, with that part of my life burned to the ground, I was standing in the wreckage, staring at something I hadn't seen in decades. A blank slate, a real future, a chance to build something for myself. Not for a woman who had spent years pretending to love me while she slept in another man's bed. I set my glass down and exhaled. First thing tomorrow, I'm seeing Ava. Megan smiled. Good answer. She deserves to know that she made the right choice, I said. She needs to see that I'm okay. And after that, I thought about it. For the longest time, I had been stuck in one place, trapped in a marriage that had been rotting for years. But now I could do anything. Go anywhere. Live for myself for once. I met Megan's gaze and smirked. I hear the beaches in Mexico are nice this time of year. She laughed. Now that's what I'm talking about. I leaned back, letting the idea settle in. A trip. A fresh start. A way to reclaim my life, piece by piece, without Lisa's shadow looming over me. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't tied down. I wasn't trapped. I was free. And I was going to make damn sure I never let anyone take that away from me again.